Chapter 746. If only life was as beautiful as it seemed at first sight. A man would not cry easily. Su Ming remembered that he rarely cried in his life, but on this day, he cried. His tears trickled down his cheeks. He looked at the damaged ninth summit, and the faces of people who had chosen to self-destruct to protect him during this battle appeared in his head. There was also Bai Su's face, as well as Yu Xian's. All of these had turned to ashes and smoke, blown away by the sea breeze. He hated the immortals, hated Morning Dao sect, and hated that Yin Death's fragmented worlds who had let all of this happen just so that they could turn him into Yin Death's child. Su Ming stood at the cave abode outside the damaged ninth summit and looked at his second senior brother, who had his eyes closed, at Hu Zi, who was snoring, and at his eldest senior brother, whose entire body had turned into stone. As he looked at them silently in the cave, Su Ming wept. He knew that this might be the last time he saw them. Perhaps he would never be able to see his senior brothers and the ninth summit again in his life, because he was about to leave and go to a place that were very, very far away. Because at that time, he would no longer have the ability to love, and he would feel no pain. Su Ming stood outside the cave, and after a long time, he slowly knelt down and kowtowed 9 times in the direction of the cave abode. Eldest senior brother, second senior brother, Hu Zi. I will have to leave it to you to search for Master. Master, Su Ming is an unfilial student. Su Ming wept and kowtowed. After some time, he stood up, and the bald crane quietly handed him a white piece of fabric. It was the only remnant of Bai Su after she had died. Su Ming had seized it with his right hand after his body crumbled, and it was kept safe by the bald crane so that wind would not blow it away. Su Ming took the white piece of fabric and looked at it quietly. A day later, he left the ninth summit. Lying behind him at the bottom of the sea was his cave abode from all those years ago. Right outside it was a grave that had been buried at the depths of the sea. A white piece of fabric was buried in that grave. It was Bai Su's grave. Su Ming left. With the promise made to the old voice from Yin Death Vortex, Su Ming knew that there was no longer any power that could disturb his senior brothers in the land of berserkers. He left. By his side was the bald crane that refused to let him leave alone. No matter what Su Ming did, it would follow him silently and keep him company by staying at his side. Chen Chen cried as he stood at the top of the ninth summit and watched Su Ming leave. At that moment, he swore in his heart to become stronger, to absolutely become stronger. He could never forget Su Ming, could never forget the days that had seemed depressing and bleak, but had turned into incredibly precious memories once he lost them. Now, all of these things were gone. Chen Chen cried and sat down on the mountain. Su Ming walked through the world. He charged forward in madness and desperation, moving at his fastest speed. He used 3 days, and had even burned his own cultivation base, to cross the Dead Sea and reach the alliance of the Western region from South Morning. He did not have much time left. He had to return to the alliance of the Western region before he left to see whether Dark Mountain truly existed. He had to see whether there were any old friends remaining there. The land in the alliance of the Western region was covered in black earth. There was a mountain at the edges of the continent. That mountain looked like a hand that had 4 fingers and stood towering over the world. At the foot of the mountain, there was a forest whose end could not be seen. It was winter in the alliance of the Western region. Snow floated down from the sky, making the forest look as if it was dressed in a white wedding dress. The white-covered ground seemed to be preparing for a wedding, yet at the same time, it looked to be getting ready for a funeral. As the snow floated down, Su Ming came to this place, the hometown upon remembering which he'd always get lost in Reviri, Dark Mountain. He did not manage to find Lei Chen, and neither did he find any old acquaintances, but he managed to find the mountain, the place that contained the beautiful moments in his memories. As Su Ming looked at Dark Mountain, tears started flowing down his eyes once again. He walked on Dark Mountain and touched the mountain rocks. Snow landed on his body, and he could not bring himself to sweep it away. He walked past the forest at the foot of the mountain and stepped on the snow. This path was the one he took when he was walking in circles as he carried Bai Ling on his back. When he moved to where Dark Mountain tribe was originally located, he found that there was no tribe there. Perhaps many years ago, there was a tribe in this place, and its name was Dark Mountain Tribe. Yet now, There was only a white layer of snow and dried-up forest before Su Ming's eyes. He stood silently in this place. Time passed. A long, long passage of time trickled by. The bald crane watched everything from the side and kept Su Ming company in silence. The sun set and rose. Snow floated down from the sky, and Su Ming stood for the entire night. He looked at the forest and the snow before he suddenly took a few steps forward and knelt down on the ground. Then, he started digging through the snow and earth on the ground. He continued digging as if he had gone mad, and gradually, his hands turned into a bloody mess, but he still continued digging, as if he did not know what pain was. When Su Ming eventually dug out a deep pit, he found some discarded items that were buried at the bottom of the pit. They were some bowls, pots, and a few more scattered items that were made of stone and exuded a presence filled with decay. As Su Ming looked at these things, his tears fell on the ground. He was familiar with these items. They belonged to Dark Mountain. Su Ming did not know how he left Dark Mountain and the mountain. In his anguish, he walked around aimlessly. Once he walked out of the forest, wisps of indistinct chimney smoke appeared before him. They came from a small tribe. It was a small tribe that had decided to settle down and grow in this place at some unknown point in time. Su Ming looked at the chimney smoke and walked slowly towards it. Cheerful songs and children's joyful laughter gradually reached his ears when he approached the tribe. As Su Ming looked at the tribe, he felt like he was looking at Dark Mountain tribe. Eventually, he lowered his head, and with a hint of melancholy, he turned around and walked into the distance. A mask appeared in his right hand. Dark light shone on it, making it stand out starkly against the snow. At the instant Su Ming was about to place the mask on his face, his footsteps suddenly froze. He turned his head around and looked at the forest in the distance. At that moment, there was a young man and woman arguing on the snow. "You once said that you'll stay with me for all eternity. You once said that this was a promise." It was a woman's voice, and she was crying as she looked at the man before her. The young man remained silent for a long while before he spoke in anguish. "I once said that, but there are no buts in this. I know you still love me, so why must you leave? We once swore an oath in the snow that we would walk together until our heads turned white. Our hair did indeed turn white from the snow, but must we part way right now? What about our promise?" The woman wept, and her voice drifted in the wind and snow. The young man lowered his head in anguish. He had his own troubles. Su Ming looked at the young man and woman and listened to their words. A girl filled with wild beauty appeared before his eyes. That girl was Bai Ling, but she looked like Bai Su as well. "Can we walk till our heads turn white in the snow?" "That is a promise." Su Ming closed his eyes. At the instant he did so, he sent his Atman outwards. A shudder ran through the young man's body in the forest. When he lifted his head, a gentle look appeared in his eyes. That gentle gaze made the crying woman standing before him stop crying. The young man smiled and moved beside the woman. He took off the fang necklace on his neck and the earring on her left ear. "We will walk till our heads turn white in the snow, and we will do the same thing when it is not snowing. This is a promise." The woman hugged the young man, and her weeping was now filled with joy. At that moment, Su Ming opened his eyes in the distance. He did not turn his head back to look but continued walking further away while welcoming the snow and wind against him. He lifted his right hand and slowly placed the mask on his face. At the instant he did so, not a single hint of warmth could be sensed from his body anymore. It was instead replaced by heartlessness and mercilessness, and his presence became so chilling even the snow could not match it. Su Ming moved into the distance. From then on, he could no longer love, could no longer feel pain. He was no longer himself. He was like a picture in the snow. The name for that picture was "If Only Life Was As Beautiful As It Seemed at First Sight." End of Arc 3. Chapter 747, The Barren Lands of Divine Essence. Arc 4, Rising in Power in the Barren Lands of Divine Essence. Su Ming's body was gradually covered by snow as he walked into the distance. At the moment he put on the mask on his face, his level of cultivation immediately started rising and reached great completion in life matrix from the later stage of that realm. As he left, The presence belonging to life privation filled his body. A thick wave of aura of death turned into a ring in his body, but even though he was in life privation realm, Su Ming still did not stop moving. Instead, he kept on coldly walking into the distance. As he did so, the blue sky in the land of berserkers started withdrawing layer by layer to reveal the gigantic yin-death vortex behind it. That vortex was rotating slowly and letting out booming sounds. Those sounds were like roars as they reverberated in the air. It almost felt like they were screaming a chant that no one could understand. Soon, the vortex in the sky started rotating faster. As it spun, Su Ming lifted his head amidst the snow and wind falling around him. The black mask he wore on his face was incredibly cold, making his gaze full of mercilessness and heartlessness. He was dressed entirely in white. At that moment, besides feeling cold, he also radiated a sense of apathy towards life. He slowly flew up into the sky, towards the vortex. "Welcome, Yin-Death's child of Yin-Death's fragmented worlds. I didn't expect that you would put on the mask before the 7 days ended." The ancient voice said slowly from the vortex, and there was not a hint of emotion that could be detected within it. "Noisy." The masked Su Ming spoke coldly. The icy chill in his words seemed to be able to make even the vortex freeze for a moment. His blunt manner of speech, however, contained absolutely no hint of emotion, which brought a pause to the old voice in the vortex. However, after that slight pause, he let out a loud bark of laughter. "Good." As expected of Yin-Death's child who lost his ability to feel and sense of pain. "I will open the path for you and send you to the barren lands of divine essence. This relocation will use up a large amount of energy we've stored over countless years in Yin-Death's fragmented worlds. I wish success upon you." As that old voice laughed, Yin-Death vortex started rotating swiftly in the sky. Soon, a large hole appeared at the center of the vortex. That hole was pitch black, but there were bolts of purple lightning swimming within it. At the instant it appeared, Su Ming turned into a long arc and charged inside. Su Ming continued getting closer to the hole, and he soon appeared beyond it. At the instant he got there, he stopped moving for a moment and turned his head to look at the ground beneath him. When he stood at the highest spot in the sky, the continents in the land of berserkers seemed to have shrank several times. He could see all of them at once. His gaze moved from the alliance of the western region to South Morning. As he looked at it, he could vaguely see the 9th summit. He could see his second senior brother walking out of the cave abode. Hu Zi was right behind him, as well as eldest senior brother, who had recovered from his petrified state. However, Su Ming's gaze was aloof, so aloof that it would make all those who were familiar with him feel that he had become a stranger. Su Ming turned his head back and no longer looked at the ground. He lifted his foot and stepped into the hole. Almost at the instant he did so, the bald crane behind him let out a piercing screech. Its body turned into a long arc that could slice through the air, and the moment Su Ming stepped into the hole, it followed closely behind him. The barren lands of divine essence existed in a vast galaxy. It was not part of Yin-Death region, and more accurately speaking, it existed in the same galaxy as Bright Young Emptiness, which was where the 4 true great worlds were, and which was located outside Yin-Death region. This place was the place where the criminals who had committed heinous crimes but were too difficult to kill were banished in the 4 great true worlds. There were all sorts of malicious fiends in there, and big armies formed by numerous powerful warriors from the 4 great true worlds would take turns once every 5,000 years to fend against the barren lands of divine essence. They were not just fending against the place to prevent those who had been judged to be criminals to return to the 4 great true worlds, but were also fending against the members of the alien race from the barren lands of divine essence. There was an endless amount of abandoned cultivation planets within the galaxy in the barren lands of divine essence. A large amount of poisonous air filled the entire abandoned galaxy. The strength of poison was enough to make all those who were somewhat weaker to begin rotting away and die. The barren lands of divine essence were incredibly big, but very few knew just how big they were. Rumors had it that it was once an incredibly fertile place, but the war between the 4 great true worlds against the so-called alien races had caused this place to become a barren piece of land. There were plenty of entrances to the barren lands of divine essence, but only one exit was discovered over the years. There was a seal at the exit. It had been placed by the 4 great true worlds, and it was the spot where a large number of powerful warriors from the 4 great true worlds had gathered to fend against the criminals. It was like a ravine, and it had withstood plenty of attacks that were sent from the barren lands of divine essence over the years. It was a ravine formed by more than thousands of cultivation planets. They had gathered together to form a huge rune that sealed off and locked down space, so the barren lands of divine essence were tightly closed off. In fact, there was a powerful suppressive art at this exit. It was part of what was used to fend against the alien races from the barren lands of divine essence. The criminals who had committed heinous crimes from the 4 great true worlds had been banished to this place because this meant that they'd have to confront the alien races. Those who sent them here wanted to make them fight the alien races for the resources and a chance at survival in this abandoned galaxy that was barren of resources. Living was a desire in the barren lands of divine essence. Only if people lived would they have endless possibilities. However, the absence of resources, lack of food, and chaos in the spiritual energy caused devastating fights to become frequent. They occurred often since people needed to fight for all kinds of resources. All of this was what the 4 great true worlds wished to see and would be overjoyed to come true. As long as they sealed the exit and often sent criminals in there, then as time passed, this place would slowly fall to ruin. It was not as if there were no loopholes to this plan, but over the countless years the 4 great true worlds kept this place under watch. Almost all loopholes had been slowly filled up using all sorts of methods, turning this place into a sort of hell. This place was indeed hell. It was a cage, a crazed wasteland of resources that would help a person become a deity. The battle between the 4 great true worlds and the alien races and the deaths over the countless years had caused the barren lands of divine essence to be filled with boundless aura of death. The density of it in this place might not match that in Yin Death region, but the difference wasn't great. In fact, there were certain places where the aura of death was even thicker than that in Yin Death region, but similarly, there were also certain regions where the aura of death was thin. Su Ming laid on a ground that was bloody red in color. A bloody stench that would make anyone nauseous filled the air as it mixed with heat. This was an abandoned cultivation planet full of volcanoes. In fact, there were quite of them that were constantly erupting, so the air was filled with something that would burn in the body once someone breathed it in. Su Ming had been lying there for 3 days, and it was the place he had first appeared once he entered the barren lands of divine essence. The large amount of poisonous air and the thin aura of death made this planet to not be very suitable for habitation in the barren lands of divine essence. However, it could still be marginally accepted as a place where people could live. Yet due to this thin aura of death, Su Ming felt as if his body was melting, and a large amount of black aura seeped out of him. It wasn't the first time he'd ran into such an event, though. It just meant that the density of the aura of death in this place was not thick enough, so his body, which originated from Yin Death, was unable to get used to it. What was happening to him was a form of aging. Usually, at this point of time, pain would fill Su Ming's body and try to submerge him within itself like tidal waves, but this time, he was calmly looking at the sky calmly and quietly watching the muddled sky. Not a single part of his body was aching, because he had lost his sense of pain. The sky here was muddled and gave off a feeling of authenticity which Su Ming had never sensed before. This was a real sky filled with stars, not the sky that was an illusion formed over the Yin-Death vortex above the land of berserkers. The aging and melting of his body lasted 3 days. The vast amounts of poisonous air in the area rotted Su Ming's clothes, and as his body melted and recovered, hideous boils gradually appeared on his skin. However, Su Ming seemed to be completely unaware of this. He continued lying there while looking at the sky. No one knew what he was thinking about. The mask on his face had also slowly melted away once he reached the barren lands of divine essence, as if it had buried itself deep into his skin. It looked as if it had disappeared, revealing Su Ming's pale face, but in truth, it was still around. Su Ming could sense its existence. The bald crane was lying by the side in the form of a red stone. There was a pair of eyes on that stone that were staring at Su Ming anxiously. The poisonous air in this place made the bald crane feel extremely uncomfortable, but it did not begin melting and aging like Su Ming due to the lack of aura of death in this place. It had turned into a stone because for some unknown reason this place felt very familiar. The bald crane had a sense that if someone noticed its crane form, it would end up in a very wretched state. That was why it had instinctively chosen to turn into this form beside Su Ming. Time trickled by. When the third evening arrived and the heat and poisonous air in the world dispersed slightly, a glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. When he looked at the sky in the distance coldly, the eyes on the stone that was the bald crane were also immediately hidden. Soon, rapid footsteps came from the distance. It sounded like there were 8 thin people moving there. Once those people revealed themselves, Su Ming saw that they were carrying corpses over their shoulders and seemed to be about to pass by the place. Suddenly, a frail middle-aged man who was the leader of the group and who was so thin that he was just skin and bones but had incredibly bright eyes that were shining brilliantly while he carried a rotting corpse over his shoulders stopped moving. Once he stopped, the 7 people behind him also stopped. The middle-aged man was dressed in a long purple robe. There were many areas that had been damaged on that robe, and it was incredibly large, a telling sign that this did not originally belong to the frail middle-aged man. When he stopped moving, his eyes sparkled, and he looked towards Su Ming lying in the distance. When he did so, a person behind him put down the corpse he had over his shoulder and charged towards Su Ming. He was so quick that he instantly closed a distance of several thousands of feet. A wave of power that would not lose to Su Ming's own circled around him. The person himself was a thin, emaciated old man with a hunched back. Once he arrived beside Su Ming, he looked into Su Ming's aloof eyes and suddenly started laughing. "Leader, there is one more offering here we can sacrifice to our God, and he even hasn't died yet." Chapter 748. Offering. Su Ming looked at the old man coldly. He could not move his body. The lack of aura of death had caused him to no longer look like a young man but an old man with an aged face. The boils that covered many parts of his body made him into a terrifying sight to behold. If no one had bothered Su Ming, then based on his current condition, he would have needed another half a month to get used to the climate in this place and regain his mobility. That is if he didn't die from the loss of all the aura of death in his body. Since Su Ming's current body was formed of aura of death, what truly existed was only his soul, so the poisonous air in the area could not hurt his soul. The boils were formed when the poisonous air crashed against the aura of death in Su Ming's body. It might look devastating, but in truth, not much damage was delivered to him. The greatest harm to him was the fact that the aura of death in this place was very thin. When the old man's voice reached the 7 people in the distance, they came back and closed in on Su Ming in the span of a breath. The speed at which they traveled caused Su Ming's eyes to shrink, though only in a barely noticeable manner. The cultivation levels of the 6 were about the same as Su Ming's. Based on the mighty pressure spreading out from the purple-robed man's body, it was obvious that he was a powerful warrior at the peak of the 2nd step. He only had 1 step remaining before he could become a lord of a world plane. The purple-robed man crouched down and lifted his right hand before touching the spot above Su Ming's heart. After a moment, he pulled back his right hand. The poisonous air attacked his physique, and aura of death filled his entire body. This sort of pain is incredibly hard for others to endure. His will is powerful, at the very least. He actually managed to stay alive despite these injuries. It's a pity that it's difficult to recover once aura of death enters your body, or else he would be a good worker, the purple-robed man said faintly. Once he got up, he swept his gaze over Su Ming's body and frowned slightly. He could not find any storage bags on him. Su Ming's storage bag was indeed not on his body. When the bald crane had transformed into a stone, its mind had worked nimbly, and it had instinctively taken Su Ming's storage bag. Now that the crane had turned into a stone, no one could see it. "Let's take him. Our God should like a living offering even more." The purple-robed man charged into the distance. The thin old man giggled and brought Su Ming over his shoulder. He grabbed the corpse he'd placed on the ground earlier with his right hand and rushed off with the team. The stone that was the bald crane lifted its head behind them. Once it blinked, it carefully moved, swiftly following after them. The group charged forth through the dark. None of them spoke on the way as they were rushing forth, their expressions filled with caution as they occasionally observed their surroundings. The eruptions from the volcanoes at night in this abandoned cultivation planet were weaker than when they were during the day. The poisonous air scattered slightly under the moonlight, turning into a layer of fog that covered the entire area. Under the purple-robed man's lead, the group charged forth without stop for several hours. When it was almost midnight, they arrived at the foot of a large volcano. This was a volcano that was millions of feet in size and towered into the clouds. Its open maw could be seen faintly high above. At that moment, there were billows of black smoke rising into the sky, and when muffled booms came from the volcano's mouth, they sounded like ferocious beasts roaring. The purple-robed man's footsteps halted for a moment, then he sucked in a deep breath. The wariness on his face became even greater. The people behind him spotted the same reaction, as if there was a great danger within this place. Su Ming's face remained calm. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the volcano. His body was carried by the thin old man, who moved forward, charging towards the mouth of the volcano. The moment the group got close to the gigantic opening, a low shout immediately came from inside it. "Who is it?" The purple-robed man wrapped his fist in his palm and replied in a low voice, "Yu Hongbang." After saying that, the purple-robed man charged toward the mouth of the volcano. The 7 people behind him immediately followed. When they got close, Su Ming saw that the ring that formed the mouth of the volcano now had nearly 100 people standing there. Most of these people were thin and emaciated. However, their eyes were bright. Strangely, though, all of these people carried a corpse over their shoulders. There were even some who carried about 4 or 5 of them on their shoulders. Yu Hongbang's arrival attracted quite a lot of attention, but the purple-robed man's expression did not change. He brought the people behind him to an empty spot at the edge of the ring. When he stopped there, a brilliant light shone in his eyes as he looked coldly at the people who had turned their gazes towards him. A glint shone in Su Ming's eyes. None of the near 100 people in this place were weak. Even the weakest among them were in the initial stage of the second step. Not a single one among them was below the second step. In fact, Su Ming had also spotted about 7 among the near 100 people in this place who were at the peak of the second step, just like the purple-robed man. Su Ming might not know the reason why these people had come to this place, but once he saw that all of them had brought corpses here, his gaze turned towards the mouth of the volcano. It was pitch black inside. Only billowing black smoke rose into the sky. Whatever was within could not be seen clearly. However, the occasional booms that sounded like roars emitted a powerful pressure that could bring fear to hearts. "All right, time's up. Those who should be here are here. As for those who aren't here, they should have run into some form of accident." As the people around the area remained silent, an old man with white hair who was dressed in a black robe spoke languidly. The number of people behind him was the greatest. There were about 20 standing at attention behind him. All of them had brightly burning eyes, and they all had extraordinary power. "We will proceed with the established rules regarding the offerings to our God. I will still be the one who starts first, and then, starting from my left, you'll each make an offering one by one. The offerings will end at the one standing to my right. Then, we will leave at the same time, and we won't be allowed to travel in the same direction." As the old man spoke, he bowed towards the mouth of the volcano. "We will now make offerings to our God. O God, please show yourself." The old man's voice rang in the air. Once it traveled into the volcano, he swung his arm, and the 3 corpses placed by his side flew out at the same time, then fell straight into the mouth of the volcano. A roar that shook the hearts of the people in the area and even caused some to instinctively take a step backwards came from inside the volcano. At the same time, a crimson-red shadow was flung out. As it shone, the 3 corpses falling down immediately shattered. They did not turn into torn pieces of flesh, but disintegrated and turned into ashes. Wisps of light green aura spread out from the ashes and were absorbed by the crimson-red shadow. When the crimson-red shadow no longer swayed and became clear, what was revealed was a gigantic, ferocious creature with the body of a snake and the head of a phoenix. Its body, which was connected to the entrance of the volcano, was 100 feet in breadth and was endless in terms of length. If no one paid any attention to the creature's body, then this would be a divine phoenix in the volcano that was looking at the crowd around it coldly. All those who were seen by the creature would instinctively lower their heads, not daring to meet its gaze. Su Ming's pupils constricted as he stared at the strange ferocious beast. He had never seen its kind before. A mighty pressure was spreading out from the ferocious beast's body, rising the temperature in the area to a state where it was scorching hot. The old man who had thrown the 3 corpses wrapped his fist in his palm towards the creature in respect. When he took a few steps back, The followers behind him immediately moved forward and threw out the corpses they'd brought as well. There were 32 corpses in total. Once they tossed them outwards, the beast with the phoenix head would ram against them, turning them into ashes. It would absorb the light green aura that spread out from those ashes, and once it devoured it, the ferocious beast would let out an ear-splitting roar. As it roared, it spat out 32 balls of fire from its mouth. These balls of fire immediately extinguished once they flew out, turning into 32 crystals that were filled with impurities and charged towards the old man. Excitement appeared on the old man's face. With a swing of his arm, the crystals were immediately swept towards him. Once he wrapped his fist in his palm and bowed towards the beast, he retreated 10 steps away from the inner edge of the ring along with his followers. As Su Ming looked at this scene, understanding appeared in his eyes. This was, after all, a land barren of resources. Since they were cultivators, food was not that important to them. However, the lack of power of the world would be a huge blow. Crystal would then become the most important thing to them. If there were no crystals, not only would they not be able to improve, their cultivation bases would start regressing slowly. Once that started, they would end up dead in the barren lands of divine essence. By feeding this beast with the phoenix head, they obtain crystals which exist in the beast's body in exchange. They must have appeared there by some unknown method. Su Ming narrowed his eyes. Once the old man retreated, the person to his left immediately repeated the process and threw out the corpses he'd brought with his followers. The corpses were all reduced to ashes once the ferocious beast crashed into them, and when it devoured the light green aura, it spat out an equivalent amount of crystals. Before the purple-robed man's turn, 2 more roars came from the volcano, and 2 slightly smaller beasts with phoenix heads rose from the volcano to devour the light green aura from the corpses. Before long, it was the purple-robed man's turn. He immediately threw out the corpse he carried over his shoulder, and the 7 people behind him did the same. Su Ming kept his eyes open all this while, but he could not move. Once he was thrown out, a smaller beast head immediately flung itself to touch his body. Once it did so, Su Ming immediately sensed a great force traveling into his body. That power seemed to contain some form of law in it that could cause a person's body, blood, flesh, and bones to be perfectly separated from each other. They would not turn into torn pieces, but would disintegrate into ashes. In fact, the way Su Ming felt it, this force that knocked into him was not strong at all. It was not enough to make his body crumble, but that crash seemed to contain some kind of power that was similar to the power of law, forcing Su Ming to disintegrate and turn into ashes. Yet there was no light green aura that spread out from his body when it turned into ashes. The small beast with the phoenix head was stunned momentarily, but it still opened its mouth wide to suck in a deep breath. Even though Su Ming's physical body was no longer around, his soul was still around, and once the creature sucked in that breath, his soul was immediately absorbed into its mouth due to the suction force. After a moment, when the crowd at the entrance of the volcano had tossed out all the corpses they brought and obtained an equivalent amount of crystals in exchange, they retreated and charged backwards in different directions, leaving the place. Chapter 749, Body of Flesh and Blood. Usually, during this moment, no accidents would occur as they left. The 3 ferocious beasts would return to the volcano and wait for the next time they came to this place. Yet for some unknown reason, when the crowd withdrew and the 3 ferocious beasts had returned to the volcano, the small creature that had devoured Su Ming started trembling furiously and let out a shrill roar. That roar appeared suddenly, startling the swiftly retreating people, but none of them were fools. All of those who could survive in the barren lands of divine essence were calculative shrews. They were only stunned for a moment. All of them immediately snuffed out their curiosity and, without any hesitation, increased their speed of retreat. Curiosity was something that had to be paid for with a person's life in the galaxy that was the barren lands of divine essence. This cultivation planet might not be located at the center of the barren lands of divine essence, slightly closer to the edge instead, but the level of danger here was still incredibly high. The shrill roars continued to echo, the creature's voice spreading in all directions, lingering in the air for a long time. At the instant Su Ming was devoured by the smaller creature, he suddenly came to understand why the ancient existence in Yin Death Vortex had chosen him, who had only arrived at life privation, to become Yin Death's child, and even paid such a high price to send him to the barren lands of divine essence. Because His body was made of aura of death, and his core was his soul. His soul was different from that of others. When the parts of his body were separated from each other, it felt as if shackles that had held him for a long time had been finally removed. A feeling as if he was free and there was nothing affecting his soul rose in Su Ming's heart. As his soul spread out and he was absorbed into the ferocious beast's mouth, his soul enveloped the entire creature's body, and he could sense that this creature was about 17,000 feet long. He could even sense that there was a soul struggling madly within its body to fight against Su Ming's soul trying to overtake its body. Yet once this struggling soul touched Su Ming, it uttered a piercing screech, and a loud roar escaped the creature's body, echoing far and wide. A rumble rang in the air, and the small creature's body fell back into the volcano. The hot magma instantly enveloped the creature. At the same time, the two ferocious beasts beside it cried out and swam around it. However, the confusion in their eyes made it clear that they did not know what had happened to their companion. The shrill roars from the small creature lasted for the time it takes to burn an incense stick, weakening gradually. Its soul had already shattered by this point, as if it could not put up even a single bit of resistance against Su Ming's soul. Its body was being slowly torn apart in the magma. A large amount of blood gushed out, and its scales crumbled. Its body shrank rapidly, as if it was withering away. The other two ferocious beasts continued to swim about the smaller creature, roaring endlessly while staring at their withering companion. As it shrank, a hand suddenly stretched out from its bloody back. That hand looked like it was mere bones and was limp, giving an impression that it could not be lifted up. Yet as the small creature continued withering away and its body shrank to less than 5,000 feet compared to its previous 17,000 feet, the hand that had stretched out of its back filled with strength, and gradually, the entire arm appeared. Soon after, another arm appeared, and then, Su Ming's head and the rest of his body pushed through. His eyes were shut. As his body gathered together, the small creature's body started trembling violently. Its flesh and blood were being absorbed to become the nutrients for the physical body Su Ming had gathered together. When its body withered to only 1,000-something feet, most of Su Ming's body had left the small creature's back. At the instant he completely walked out, the 1,000-feet-long creature's body became stiff. Once it withered away completely, it was submerged in magma. There was not a hint of blood on Su Ming's body. Instead, a refreshing scent spread out from his body. His eyes were closed as his body was submerged in the magma. However, the heat of it was unable to injure him even in the slightest. The large and tiny ferocious beasts were slowly approaching Su Ming at that moment. Once they swam a few circles around him, they stopped screeching. It seemed that in their senses, Su Ming was their small companion. In the blink of an eye, half a month passed. Throughout this entire time, Su Ming was submerged in the magma, motionless. On the day after half a month had passed, his eyelashes fluttered lightly, and he gradually opened his eyes. When he did so, a brilliant light shone within them. It was slightly different from the light in Su Ming's eyes previously. If no one took a closer look, it would be difficult for them to find anything amiss, but Su Ming himself knew well that there was something different about him. His previous self had been formed from the aura of death. It might have seemed real, and he had been a real entity when he was in Yin Death region, but his physical body had been an illusion. It was fake, and everything about him had been formed with his soul as the foundation. Yet his current body was void of aura of death and was no longer a mere illusion. He now had a real body that was made of flesh and blood. It was a body that was gathered together once he used the ferocious beast as nutrients, which he had managed to do after transforming its body once he occupied it with his soul. Building the abyss, huh? Su Ming whispered softly. His soul had finally become complete after the 3 seals had been released in Yin Death region. Once it became complete, he had heard the familiar voice whispering these words in his ear. When he was in the ferocious beast's body just now, this voice had reverberated in his ears once again. In silence, Su Ming lowered his head and looked at his own body with a calm expression. When he lifted his right hand slowly and clenched it, a feeling of power burst forth within him. It was an incredibly unique feeling of qi that he had never sensed before. Besides this feeling, Su Ming also had a faint sense that there was a power of a law he did not quite understand contained within his fist. That power of law was like some form of inborn ability. However, it did not belong to him. It instead belonged to this body of flesh and blood, which originated from the creature with the phoenix head. If that is the case, then even though I felt that my body in Yin Death region was real, it was in fact fake. Even after I've managed to sacrifice all my bones, what had changed was not my illusory body, but my soul. Having a soul as my body, that was me when I was in Yin Death region. Su Ming slowly stood up and stepped on magma. He did not sense even a single hint of unbearable heat. This was due to more than just him losing his sense of pain. There were also other reasons behind this. All things of earth forming my body, that is the me now. Once Su Ming got up, the magma immediately started churning. A creature with a beast head crawled out and approached him with its big head. Once it nuzzled against Su Ming, it let out a cheerful cry. Su Ming's presence gave it a sense of familiarity. It was the presence that belonged to its companion. Even if Su Ming's appearance was different from its companion, their presence was the same. Su Ming looked at the small creature, and after a long while, lifted his right hand slowly. He patted the small creature's head, and it immediately flung its head as it screeched. Then its body, which was 10,000-something feet, charged out of the magma, heading straight towards the mouth of the volcano above it. After a moment, as piercing cries rang out in the air, the small creature flew back down with a bald crane in its beak. During the past half a month, the bald crane had been cautiously avoiding the mouth of the volcano, staying at the edges. It had wanted to enter many times to look, but the mighty pressure coming from the mouth of the volcano had robbed it of its courage. It had been peeking from the edge of the entrance to examine what was inside, but immediately noticed a wave of heat closing in on it. Before it managed to react to the situation, the small creature with the phoenix head had clamped its beak around the bald crane's body and brought it into the volcano. As the bald crane screamed, it saw Su Ming standing on the magma, and its screams disappeared, replaced by surprised delight. "Damn it all, so you aren't dead yet, little Su? You made this old crane think you were dead." The bald crane flapped its wings and flew carefully to a burning crimson rock by the side. After touching it a few times, it decided that it was still bearable and laid there, looking at Su Ming with surprise. Su Ming's expression was cold and aloof. Once he cast a glance at the bald crane, he lifted his right hand and stretched his hand towards it. The bald crane saw the aloof look in Su Ming's eyes and its words died down in its mouth. It sighed. With a flap of its wings, a storage bag immediately flew out towards Su Ming. Once he grabbed it, Su Ming opened it calmly and immediately brought out a long robe. Rays of starlight instantly started flashing in the volcano, revealing that this was Dao Yuan's sacred constellation robe. Once Su Ming put it on, his disposition changed. However, the stars on his robe did not move, as if they were dead. "I see, so it's difficult for those whose family name is not Dao to bring out its power, huh?" Su Ming cast the constellation robe a glance and spread his Atman, which was now at life privation realm, outwards. Then he had his Atman fuse with the robe. When Su Ming retrieved his Atman a moment later, while the stars on the robe remained unmoving, the robe's color gradually changed until it turned into a very ordinary-looking black robe. It has 108 runes to verify a person's identity, and only those with the blood of the Dao family can bring out all of its power. Even if outsiders put divine sense into it, they can only bring out the simpler and more basic functions of the robe. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He no longer bothered about this matter, but chose to sit down on the magma. With his eyes closed, he exercised his breathing. He had gotten used to this sort of breathing exercise when he was in Yin Death region, but once he obtained a real physical body, the exercise felt a little unfamiliar to him. As he exercised his breathing, a large amount of heat spread out from the magma and gathered about his body. 3 months passed in the blink of an eye. Su Ming never left the volcano during this time and continued training while absorbing the hot power of the flames, which caused his hair to turn dark red. His body also blended perfectly with his soul, and he could now bring out the complete power of life privation realm with this body. On the day 3 months later, the bald crane yawned on the stone and wondered in boredom whether it should take a stroll outside when the magma around Su Ming suddenly started boiling. At the same time, the colossal ferocious beast with the phoenix head that was about 100 feet in breadth and had never appeared after Su Ming woke up rushed out of the magma and let out a roar towards the entrance of the volcano before charging towards it. The smaller creature with the phoenix head also flew out behind it. Su Ming's eyes sparkled as faint voice from beyond the volcano reached his ears. "We will now make offerings to our God. O God, please show yourself." Chapter 750, Crimson Flame Planet. At that moment, there was no longer around 100 people gathered at the entrance of the volcano, but only about 70 to 80. Their faces were pale, and most had injuries on their bodies. The purple-robed man, Yu Hongbang, was standing at the edge of the ring. His face was pale as well, and his coughs would occasionally travel into the air, as if he had blood in his mouth. There were only 4 left of the 7 behind him, the thin old man being one of them. The old man from around 3 months ago was the one speaking. There were only 10 people left behind him. All of them were carrying corpses over their shoulders. Some of these corpses were their friends, and some of them strangers. As the old man's voice resounded in the air, a roar came from within the volcano. The gigantic ferocious beast with the phoenix head that was 100 feet in breadth looked at the cultivators around it coldly. Once the old man threw out the corpse respectfully, the ferocious beast with the phoenix head rammed into it as usual and caused the corpse to disintegrate before sucking in the light green aura and spitting out a crystal. When nearly 40-something corpses were thrown out in succession, the slightly smaller creature with the beast head flew out with a roar and also started ramming its body against the corpses before devouring them. Once it devoured about 20-something corpses, it stopped eating the light green aura and lowered its head to look into the mouth of the volcano, which was right under it. The gigantic ferocious beast beside it also looked at the volcano and let out a roar. There was no ill will within that roar. It instead sounded like an urging for someone to come forward. This scene stunned all the people around the ring, and the cultivators that were about to throw out the corpses froze in their movements for a moment. Then, before the expectant gazes of the 2 ferocious beasts and the 70-80 people around the mouth of the volcano, Su Ming rose slowly into the air. His face was calm and his movements were not quick, but once he appeared, intense shouts that could not be contained immediately came from the mouths of the 70-80 people. Who is that? Someone actually managed to live in the volcano where the Crimson Python Phoenix lives? This person is. The Crimson Python Phoenixes are usually very averse to strangers. They're incredibly fierce, so could they let a person live in their cave abode? The loud voices reverberated in the air. The 70-80 people sucked in a breath and moved back without any hesitation. Yu Hongbang looked at Su Ming flying out of the volcano, and his eyes went wide. Su Ming's body might have been changed from an illusion formed from the aura of death to one possessing flesh and blood, but his appearance was still as before, and Yu Hongbang could recognize with just one glance that he was the person he had picked up 3 months ago. At that moment, his shock could be said to be the greatest among all those present. Disbelief appeared on his face, and once he staggered several dozens of steps backwards, he looked at the thin old man beside him. 3 months ago, it was this old man that had personally taken this person who had still not died to this place and thrown him into the volcano. At that moment, the thin old man's eyes had almost popped out of his eye sockets. Shock and disbelief was on his face, and even his breathing had stopped for an instant. As the crowd retreated in shock, the gigantic ferocious beast with the phoenix head opened its mouth wide and let out a terrifying roar, causing all the people's footsteps to stop, but the shock on their faces could not be hidden no matter how much they tried. This sort of thing surpassed their imagination. Su Ming's expression was calm. Once he rose into the air, he walked towards the gigantic Crimson Python Phoenix. He landed on its head and looked at the crowd beneath him coldly. The large creature did not avoid him, simply allowing him to stand on its head. To it, Su Ming's presence was the familiar one of its child. "Throw the corpses," Su Ming said flatly. Once he spoke, the 70-80 people in the area immediately fell silent. Their eyes shone as they looked at Su Ming, but their gazes were filled with terror. This scene was simply too far-fetched for them, something they could have never imagined. The only explanation for this was one, and a single, almost uniform thought rose in most of the people's heads at that moment. However, none of them took the initiative to voice it. The cultivator that had been about to throw his corpse gritted his teeth and took a step forward, finishing his action. The corpse sliced through the air in a long arc, going straight for Su Ming. At the instant it came close, a glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes, and he clenched his right fist before punching the corpse. At the instant his fist connected, Understanding appeared in Su Ming's eyes. A loud bang resounded, but there was no blood, and neither did the corpse fall into pieces. Instead, it disintegrated and turned into ashes before disappearing. Wisps of light green aura spread out, but Su Ming did not absorb it. The smaller crimson python phoenix beside him blinked and opened its mouth, inhaling the light green aura. Su Ming lowered his head and looked at his fist. Previously, he could clearly sense a strange power of law that came from his body, and it was a bizarre power that could perfectly disassemble all materials. What is this place in the barren lands of divine essence? Su Ming coldly asked from the crimson python phoenix's head once he lifted his own up. There was not a single hint of emotion contained within his words. The chilling tone made it seem as if the temperature around the area had fallen by quite a large margin. This aloof voice immediately terrified the people around the mouth of the volcano even more. At that moment, they became even more certain of the assumption they'd made in their heads. Yu Hongbang's heart trembled. He remembered that this person had not died 3 months ago, even when aura of death had entered his body. In fact, his consciousness had been very clear, and that aloof gaze instantly filled his heart with bitterness. Since he was able to not die when aura of death entered his body and had the capability to subdue a powerful creature such as the crimson python phoenix, this can only mean that he is not from this place, especially based on what he said. The mercilessness and aloof tone of his words that seemed to come from his soul, too. Could this person really be from? The thin old man started shivering lightly. Clearly, he had thought of some sort of frightening thing. Only those who are mass murderers can have absolutely no emotion in their words and speak with a tone that is as cold as ice. Only those who are indifferent towards human lives can be completely fearless despite having crossed into a different galaxy, and only these people can subdue these crimson python phoenixes. The white-haired old man in the lead felt his heart tremble. He might have been doubtful at first, but this doubt disappeared swiftly under the crimson python phoenix's gaze. He sucked in a deep breath and wrapped his fist in his palm before bowing to Su Ming. This is Crimson Flame Planet. It is located at the edge of the barren lands of divine essence, and if a mighty person in the third step traveled from here to the True World's galaxy, it would take about 30 years for them to reach that place. About 200 years would be needed to reach Black Ink Planet, which is located beyond the barren lands of divine essence. Sir, did you come from the world outside? The old man's expression was incredibly respectful. There was even a hint of respect when he said his final sentence. Su Ming might not seem powerful, but to not waste power by having it spread around the barren lands of divine essence, many people usually sealed it up to prevent too much depletion. Su Ming fell into a moment of pensive silence, then asked languidly, "Does Crimson Flame Planet have anything that grows here in abundance?" "Nothing grows here in abundance except for the crimson flame grass that lives in the region of flames." The old man quickly answered, "How many powerful warriors of the third step are here?" Su Ming suddenly asked.